How would you summarize the Christian faith down to only 2 words? The Christian faith down to only 2 words. Well, if I were to do it, I would do it like many have done it, and that is with the 2 words, Jesus saves. Now, I'd be quick to point out that when the Bible uses the word saves, it does not mean forgive your sins and make a reservation for heaven when you die. It means the broader sense of help. We see this classic example of the word where Peter is out on the water and he's about to sink and he says, Lord, save me. And he doesn't mean, Lord, get me a reservation for heaven when I die. He doesn't mean, Lord, forgive me of my sins. He means, Lord, I am in trouble. Lord, I am in trouble. Help me right now. And the message of the gospel is God helps. God saves. Jesus helps. Jesus saves. We now have rather well-documented proof that people who follow Jesus have better mental health. That is, they're less likely to be depressed. They're less likely to abuse drugs. They're less likely to have all kinds of social evils. Those people who follow God, life is better for them. And over and over and over, people have summarized Christianity with Jesus saves. They put it on license plates. They put it on buildings. They put it on in neon lights. Jesus saves. Now, another question. What if you were to summarize? What if I assigned you the goal of summarizing not the Christian faith, but your application to the Christian faith? What are you to do? What are you to do about the Christian faith? How would you summarize that? And I'm going to give you not just 2 words. I'm going to very liberally give you 3 words. How would you summarize our application of Christian living? And I would say it this way: come to Jesus. If I wanted to get down to 2 words, I might just say follow Jesus, but we're going to use the phrase come to Jesus in this case. So as we look at today's passage, and I remind you, teacher, that when you look at the Bible, you always want to give them something to look for. And what we're looking for today is, what do we learn about coming to Jesus? What do we learn about following Jesus from today's passage? Luke 8, beginning in verse 40, now when Jesus returned, a crowd welcomed him. A crowd loved following him, for they were all expecting him. Then a man named Jairus, a synagogue leader named Jairus, followed Jesus, came and fell at Jesus' feet, pleading with him to come to his house, because his only daughter, a girl of about 12, was dying. As Jesus was on his way, the crowds almost crushed him. This crowd of people who were following Jesus, who were coming to Jesus, almost crushed Jesus. And a woman was there who had been a subject to bleeding for 12 years, same age as this child, coincidentally, but no one could heal her. She came up behind him and she touched the edge of his cloak, and immediately her bleeding stopped. She was helped. She came for help and she got help. Who touched me? Jesus asked. When they all denied it, Peter said, Master, the people are crowding and pressing against you. But Jesus said, it's not a good idea to correct Jesus, by the way, but Peter not hesitant to do so. But Jesus said, someone touched me. I know that power has gone out from me. Then the woman, seeing that she could not go unnoticed, came trembling and fell at his feet in the presence of all the people. She told why she had touched him, why she had come to him, why she was following him, and how she had been instantly healed. Then he said to her, Daughter, your faith has healed you. Go in peace. While Jesus was still speaking, someone came from the house of Jairus, the synagogue leader. Your daughter is dead, he said. Don't bother the teacher anymore. Hearing this, Jesus said to Jairus, Don't be afraid. Just believe, and she will be healed. When he arrived at the house of Jairus, he did not let anyone go in with him except Peter, John, and James, and the child's father and mother. Meanwhile, all the people were wailing, probably professional wailers, all the historians tell us, wailing and mourning for her. Stop wailing, Jesus said. She is not dead, but asleep. They laughed at him, knowing that she was dead. But he took her by the hand and said, My child, get up. Her spirit returned, and at once she stood up. Then Jesus told them to give her something to eat. It's interesting that Jesus raised her from the dead, but he raised her empty, and he could have raised her full. But I think the idea there is that Jesus, like a good father, never does for his children, never does for us, his children, what we can easily do for ourselves. But that's another lesson for another day. Her parents were astonished, but he ordered them not to tell. Soon enough, he'll tell them to tell the whole world. But here he says not to tell anyone what had happened. 7 observations. The first is this: to the rich and powerful, we see the principle, come to Jesus. Then a man named Jairus, a synagogue leader, may not mean much to us, but a synagogue leader, came and fell at Jesus' feet, pleading with him to come to his house. This was a formal position in the life of the synagogue, and it carried with it a host of practical responsibilities for the spiritual life of the community. And as such, Jairus was undoubtedly important and respected member of society. Now, Jesus will say in another place, he looked around him and he said to his disciples, how hard it is for the rich. And I would say not only for the rich, but those who have no problems, those who have it all together, those nice people in this world. I think it's exceedingly hard for nice people to come to Jesus because they have their life all together to some degree. And to the rich, Jesus said, how hard it is for the rich, for the together, for the connected. Of course, they asked the question, well, how in the world can anyone be saved? But Jesus looked at them and said, with man, this is impossible. With man, it would be impossible for the rich and the powerful and the connected and the together to be saved, but not with God. All things are possible with God. So the principle here is that generally speaking, it is needy people that come to Jesus, but sometimes people who have it all together come to Jesus. We saw this in the news. I saw it in the news recently when Mike Johnson became the new Speaker of the House. And the first picture I saw of him, my first awareness of him, was this picture right here, where he's down on his knees praying. And indeed, many of the pictures we find on him online find him praying. And surely he is a man of power, a man of influence, and a man who has come to Jesus. This is an exciting day for Louisiana. This is an exciting day for Louisiana Baptist. More than anything, it's an exciting day for America, says Steve Horn of the Louisiana Baptist Convention. To have someone with Mike's intellectual acumen, love for America, principled conviction, and Christian worldview as Speaker of the House gives me great hope, Horn said. We need to be praying for Mike, Kelly, and for their children. And so to the rich and powerful and the connected and those who have it together, the message of the gospel is come to Jesus. The second observation is to those who are hurting. To those who are hurting, come to Jesus. A woman was there who had been subject to bleeding for 12 years, but no one could help her. The woman that we meet in verse 43 has a drastically different station in life than does that leader in the synagogue. She was an unnamed shadow Christian, we might call her, an unnamed woman whose condition was beyond all hope. To make matters worse, the woman's condition would have meant that she was an outcast from society. Because of her bleeding, she was ceremonially unclean and would pass her uncleanness on to anyone who touched her. If she were a young woman, then this condition may very well have prevented her from having children. I would guess prevent her from getting married, a particularly isolating condition in that society. In short, you would be hard-pressed to find two people any more different in that town than Jairus and this unnamed woman. But they have one important thing in common. Do you see what important thing they have in common? What do they have in common? They were both suffering terribly. They are both at the end of the rope with no other options. They need Jesus' help badly. Now, there's a couple of ironies in this story. The first one is this. People thought that her touch would have made Jesus unclean. But instead, the touch, when she touched him, it was not her uncleanness that made Jesus unclean, but it was Jesus' cleanness, it was Jesus' wholeness that was transferred to her. Another irony is that we read here that she touched him, but in the most profound sense, she was touched by Jesus. It was Jesus that touched her life. And so it is with us. We sometimes call ourselves seekers as we come to God. But when we come to God and we find God, when we follow Jesus and when we come to Jesus, we will find that we have been chased by Jesus. Third observation, when things are really bad, come to Jesus. Because his only daughter, a girl of about 12, was dying. And I've had my fair share of having my heart broken, as you probably have as well. And one of the things I've thought about as I've thought deeply over the years about suffering is I think in all the categories in the world of suffering, one of the most difficult categories of suffering is when you see your child suffer. If you were to see your child about to die, thankfully, I have not had to endure that kind of suffering. Went out for a meeting just the other night, and there was 2 cars right in the street in front of me, about 3 doors down from my house. And their flashers were on, and there was a few people milling around. It was after dark, and I pulled up. Somebody came up to my window and said that a child had been hit, and she used the phrase, hit hard by a car. And as I pulled up a little closer, I could see this, about a 12-year-old child laying down in the street. The ambulances had not yet gotten there. And it shook me, as you might imagine. And I called my wife and I said, something awful has happened. Something awful has happened. In fact, in the categories of life, I think this is among the most awful thing that can ever happen to a human being. That when something happens to our child, it is an awful experience. And we read here that his only daughter, a girl of about 12, was dying. So for the rich and powerful, we say, come to Jesus. To the poor and needy, we say, come to Jesus. When things are really bad, come to Jesus. And fourthly, when there are delays, keep on coming to Jesus. In Luke 8:42, we read, as Jesus was on his way, he was on his way to help Jairus' daughter. But as he was on his way, he was delayed. It seems that Jesus' kindness toward the sick woman may have cost the little girl her only chance of living. And if you follow Jesus long enough, you will discover that there are, in fact, many times delays. We see this in the story of the healing of the raising of Lazarus. So when he heard that Lazarus was sick, Jesus stayed where he was 2 more days. Why 2 more days? Well, F.B. Meyer points out that God's delays are not God's denials, nor are they neglectful or unkind. He is waiting with watchful eye and intent for the precise moment to strike, when he can give a blessing which will be without alloy, and which will flood our life with blessings so royal, so plenteous, so divine, that eternity will be too short to utter all our praise. Observation number 5, when things get worse than you ever imagined, come to Jesus. So we've been reading that she was about to die. Now we read while Jesus was still speaking, someone came from the house of Jairus, the synagogue leader. Your daughter is dead, he said. Don't bother the teacher anymore. Let's look at a real life example of this.
And Kay and I are standing on the driveway, hugging each other, sobbing, just sobbing. And Kay reaches down and she's wearing a necklace that has 2 words that are the words of the title of the book she'd just written. Choose joy. And I look at her and I say, how do you choose joy when your heart is breaking in a million pieces? How do you choose joy? The police came, broke the door down, found the inevitable bad news. They're carrying my sons out in a body bag. And if I hadn't had a small group, I don't know that I'd still be in ministry right now.
When things get worse than you ever imagined they could get, come to Jesus. Follow Jesus. This is the application, the summary application of the Christian gospel. Even when life is difficult, especially when life is difficult, when life is unspeakably difficult, come to Jesus. 6th observation, come to Jesus in faith. Hearing this, Jesus said to Jairus, don't be afraid, just believe, and she will be healed. And we talked last week about the central place that faith have in the Christian faith. The just will live by faith. The Christian faith is all about living by faith. Last observation, if you struggle to believe, if you struggle to have faith, come to Jesus anyway. In this passage, we read that they laughed at him. Jesus said, believe, and they laughed at him, knowing that this girl was dead. But he took her by the hand and he said, my child, get up. In this room full of unbelieving people, Jesus said to her, my child, get up. And when you struggle to believe, follow Jesus anyway. Read the words of Jesus anyway. Read some good books on apologetics anyway. I'll confess my sin to you. My faith is not always one of certainty. I have bet the farm. I have placed my trust completely in Christ. But sometimes my faith wavers. It's one of the reasons why I'm reading right now Lee Strobel's newest book on apologetics, to bolster my own faith. Because I found that my faith is, in the words of that old hymn, prone to wander, Lord, I feel it. And if your faith is prone to wander, you'd like to believe, but you struggle to believe, the message of the gospel is, come to Jesus anyway. I love this verse. It says, immediately the boy's father exclaimed, I do believe. Help me overcome my unbelief. To the rich and powerful, we read, come to Jesus. To the hurting, we find, come to Jesus. When things are really bad, we find, come to Jesus. When there are delays, keep on coming to Jesus. When things get worse than you ever imagined they would get, come to Jesus. Come to Jesus in faith, and if you struggle to believe, come to Jesus anyway. And may God richly bless you as you teach these truths to your people this week.